1. I have a wonderful tale of creepiness to share with you. I'm honestly such a grumpy tomboy I never imagined that I would end up with a would-be stalker, especially not with the career I chose. I was a forensic death investigator. Forensics police officers that generally work with the DA's office, and or the medical examiner's office that looks into cases of suspicious death, homicides, suicides, accidents, etc. Occasionally I'd run into people who had a passing interest in what I did, because they'd seen CSI or Law and Order a few times. No big deal, right? Wrong, so very, very wrong. It started with a homicide scene I'd been called to at an ungodly hour in the morning when Mr. Fanboy showed up. He was around his late 30s to early 40s, average height and modestly fit, chattering away with one of the poor unis guarding the scene. Not a big deal, it happens, because people are curious. And then he whips out a camera and snaps a few pictures. At that point I figured he was a really nosy, tone-deaf journalist, and decided to give him a polite lecture on how inappropriate it was to take photos of crime scenes, especially when we were getting ready to move the deceased's body. I deleted the pics, sent him on his way, and figured that I'd never see him again. But no, he pops up again a week later at another questionable scene. It doesn't click yet that something is seriously off, until a week after that he shows up at another scene, this one being a complete county away from the last one. So, I worked a major city in Texas through the medical examiner's office, so we took cases from several surrounding counties, a few thousand square miles. So it was odd that this guy would show up to a rather standard scene on the outer edge of our covered area, even if he was press. I mention it to some co-workers when I get the chance, and they've noticed him hanging around some of their scenes too. When he showed up again, me and a uniformed officer shake him down to see who the hell he is, and why he's got a major hard-on for rubbernecking crime scenes. I'm used to rubberneckers. I get it, people are curious, and sometimes a bit morbid when something happened nearby. Once the excitement and newness wears off, they go on about their business. Mr. Fanboy doesn't have a criminal record, like not even speeding or parking tickets. So my superior had a talk with him, basically explained that he was making everyone nervous and it looked really shady to just start hanging out at crime scenes. So he disappears for a couple of weeks before switching to a new tactic. If he can't hang around the crime scenes, why not hang around the investigators? But of course, only the female ones. Fanboy shows up at one of my favorite dive bars that I frequent, because it was near my home, over 30 miles from where I work. Now, I'm a 5'7" woman who doesn't look imposing in the least. My co-workers used to tease that I looked like I was a kid playing dress-up in my uniform. Like most women, I tried to be polite with the guy who at the time was about 20 years my senior, but declined any offer of a drink. He doesn't take the hints, and chats me up with some of the creepiest shit I have ever heard. What's the worst crime scene you've investigated? Have you ever worked a case where the victim was dismembered? Do you think rape and murder cases are really about power dynamics, and not sexually motivated? So I'm creeped the fuck out. Those are things I don't want to talk about with a therapist, much less a dude who is giving me some seriously rapey, murdery vibes. I completely shut him down, not even trying to be polite, and he seemed a little put off but not apologetic in the least. I went home, put my service weapon back on, and called my supervisor to give them a heads up and start a paper trail for an RO. He served with a cease and desist a few days later, and I figured that the threat of an RO and trouble with the police will deter him from escalating any further. Not even 24 hours after the cease and desist is delivered, he's back to shadowing crime scenes like it's going out of style. At another female investigator's scene, he gets into an altercation with one of the uniformed officers. He gets slammed with trespassing, obstruction, and a few other charges, but since he has no record, he's let out on bail, and shows up to a scene I'm working not 3 days later. We get into a scuffle after he breaks one of my guy's noses to get onto the scene. He's not as strong as he looks, but I still ended up with a black eye. He looked worse by the time my partner and I finally get him cuffed. An investigation is opened, and turned out a police scanner and a lot of creepy journals in his car, as well as notes on where I lived and worked, along with info on one of the other female investigators. From what I heard through the grapevine, his mother's house, where he was living, was creepy as hell. Yeah, I never thought people would be that obsessed with crime scenes, forensics, or the like, that they'd end up going to jail, but here we are. I'm also very aware that he probably had a lot of very unsavory things planned for me and or one of my co-workers, which still makes my skin crawl to this day. So creepy forensics fanboy, who was probably also a Dexter wannabe, who watched too much CSI and Bones. If you ever get out of prison, let's not meet again. 2. This happened a few years ago when I was 13. I was somewhat popular in school at the time, and I had around 4 very, very close friends. Rose, Lynn, Noah, and Zach were the main ones. We went on many adventures around that time, camping, road trips, the beach. Noah's family was pretty wealthy, and all of our families were pretty lenient with rules. One day, the summer before 8th grade, we went on a camping trip with Lynn's older sister Margot and Zach's older brother Todd, so there were 7 of us. Lynn, Zach, and I were 13, Noah and Rose were 14, and Margot and Todd were both 17. We decided to go camping in a nearby forest, around 20 miles from Noah's house. It was pretty much in the middle of nowhere. Noah's house and his neighborhood were the closest homes, and there were no signals for phones or any electronics. We get to the spot easily and without problems, and we make camp. The girls in one tent, the boys in the other. Maybe it was a bad idea to have 17s, ages 13 to 17, with no phone in the woods, but our parents were lenient, like I said, and confident we would be fine since the woods were not known for anything bad or dangerous. So we set up the tents, go swimming in a nearby lake, and come back and make dinner over a fire which was about 20 feet away from the tents, which were 4 feet away from each other, by the way. We have s'mores and do all those stupid camping things before Lynn and Margot announce they are going to sleep. That left Todd, Rose, Zach, Noah, and I, as we joked around, told scary stories, and just overall had a good time. Then Margot walks up annoyed and tells us that whoever is messing with the side of the tent to stop it. Keep in mind that no one left the group, and tents were far enough away to not bother anyone in the tents. She explains that someone keeps on touching the side of the tent, running something on it, and we dismiss her. Todd states that it probably is a tree branch, and Rose and I decide to go to sleep as well. So we head back to the tent. Lynn is asleep, and we settle in, me closest to the opening, Margot next to Lynn, who is at the opposite side of the tent, and Rose in between Margot and I. I managed to fall asleep easily within 5 minutes, until I woke up suddenly, for what seemed like no reason. I checked my phone, I still brought it, and a portable charger just to take pictures, and it was literally the middle of the night, at 2:15. I looked around, my eyes getting used to the darkness, trying to figure out why I woke up. A tapping sound on the tent was what I first noticed, and a soft giggling. It sounded somewhat deep, like a male voice, but I couldn't be sure. After what felt like an hour but was probably a minute or two, the tapping and giggling stopped. I was convinced it was my imagination, or maybe one of the boys trying to prank us, or even a tree branch, like Todd suggested earlier. Telling myself it was a tree branch and lack of sleep, I fell back asleep until Rose woke me up around dawn. Everyone was awake, and we decided to hike a little. We decided to go in 2 groups because we planned on spending the night again, and didn't want anyone messing with our stuff. Even though these woods weren't popular with camping, we didn't want to risk it. Margot, Lynn, Rose, and I left to go hiking for a couple hours, while the boys opted to stay behind and fish, swim, and cook food. We hiked for about 2 hours, and we came back to the boys not at the campsite. Annoyed, Margot went down to the lake with Lynn to find them. Rose and I made our way back to the tents, and I'll be honest and say I screamed and almost wet my pants. The tents were slashed. I inspected it closer after regaining composure because I was usually the more collected out of the two of us. It seemed made with a small knife, as the cuts were small. Our tents were made of material that was pretty hard to cut into, and it seemed like the person had a pocket knife, I guessed. The boys, Margot and Lynn, came running to our screams, and were obviously startled. We decided to pack up and head home early because, for one, the tents were too ripped to use again comfortably, and two, Rose, Lynn and I were very creeped out. Even more so when Todd announced that his tires were slashed. We were all freaking out, obviously. There was no cell service, Todd's tires were slashed, and there was no way any of us wanted to stay longer. Luckily, Todd reported that Margot's tires looked fine, and Margot stated that she would take Noah and Lynn and drop them off to call 911 and their parents, and come back for us. She drove a car and there wasn't enough room for more than 3 people, as the back was filled up with the camping stuff. Zach, Todd, Rose and I were left at the campgrounds, and we decided to begin a hike back towards the main road so Margot wouldn't have to drive so far. Also, Rose and I refused to stay anywhere near the camp area. We began hiking. My phone died. The last time I looked at it, it was 1 in the afternoon. Zach and Rose both had working phones, and constantly updated us on how far we had been walking. I began to hear branches snapping from behind us, closer to the trees than we walked, and I got more and more paranoid as time went on. I told Todd, and he seemed to get more wary of our surroundings, constantly looking over his shoulder. We had been walking for about 30 minutes. Margot was probably at Noah's house, or almost there, when Todd screamed, "Run!" Naturally, I looked behind my shoulder before I began running. 3 hooded figures were running towards us. 2 had knives, and they all looked around 6'3" or taller. Todd was 6'1", but I doubted he could defend all of us against them. Even though it was broad daylight, I couldn't make out any facial features. They all appeared over or around 200 pounds. The shortest one was probably 6'2", but they all wore hoods and had masks on, like ski masks. It sounds totally fake, and I don't care if you don't believe me, but I was scared shitless that day. We began running, and the 3 guys finally gave up, or decided we weren't worth terrorizing because we lost them. We made it to the main road where we waited, walking quickly, constantly looking over our shoulders in fear until Margot arrived. We told the police everything, and they searched the woods nearby. They never found any evidence we had been there, or the guys were there, or that anything happened besides pictures of the lake around the area and the shredded tents. I don't know what would have happened if they had caught us. I'm fairly tall. I was around 5'10" during this time, only around 125 pounds. Rose was around 5'1" and 100 pounds, and Zach was barely 5'9" at the time. He probably outweighed me by 10 pounds maximum. I am so thankful that I told Todd about them. I have no doubt they would have been able to catch us if he hadn't been looking over his shoulder constantly. And I am so thankful we all got physical activity regularly, were fast enough to outrun them, and that they finally gave up. So whoever you guys were, let's never meet. 3. I want to tell you guys about the 3 creepy encounters I had while living in my home village. I lived there from the day I was born up to the age of 23. The stories I'm about to tell you happened when I was 8, 12, and 19 years old. When I say I used to live in a small village, I really mean a small village. It was the kind of village where everyone knew everything about everyone. When your parents would send you to the bakery and they didn't give you enough money, the lady behind the counter would just smile and say, "Well, that's okay. I'll ask your parents to pay me next time." My village, I'll call it Hardersfield for the sake of the story, was surrounded by farmland. There was one main road that went straight through the town, which eventually led you to a highway. The rest of the town consisted of a center, some off-the-side roads that led to houses, and dirt roads that led to the farms surrounding Hardersfield. When I was 8 years old, the creepy guy following us in the bushes. Hardersfield has its own elementary school, so naturally, I went there to get my first steps at education. It was only a 5-minute walk away from my house, and I loved it there. My class consisted of only 8 people, including me, so nobody ever got bullied, and we all knew the teachers because they were basically our neighbors. My best friend at the time was called Jenny, and we would spend almost every afternoon together, sometimes having sleepovers on school days as well. She lived on the outskirts of Hardersfield, while I lived more to the centre, so it was always fun to play at her house. Her parents had some sheep, and although they weren't farmers themselves, we would often play on the cornfield behind their house, making hideouts in the crops. That particular day after school we were pretty bored, and eventually we asked Jenny's mom if we could walk to the farm behind their house, because we heard their dog had just given birth. Her mom agreed, and told us to be back at 4:30. Like I said, Jenny's house was surrounded by farmland. The house was the last one on the road with a dead end. To get to the farm, we had to take a side road that was nothing more than a dirt track. It's called Mason Lane. That eventually led to another village if you were up for the 20-minute drive. Alongside the road were some bushes and trees. We were walking down the dirt track when we saw a car coming towards us. We thought nothing of it and gave the car the space to pass us. When the car was almost next to us, he slowed down and eventually stopped. The guy behind the wheel asked us what we were doing out here. We told him about the farm and started walking again because we weren't allowed to talk to strangers. After maybe 2 minutes, I looked over my shoulder and saw that the car had turned around and was driving behind us. I told Jenny, and she said that maybe he was lost, so we paid no further attention to it. The car drove past us again, and my uneasiness disappeared. Jenny was right after all. Then the car turned around again and came towards us. We could just see the farm in the distance, but it was too far to run towards it, as was Jenny's house. I told Jenny I was getting scared, and she grabbed my hand as we dove into the bushes next to the road. We got on our hands and knees and lay on the ground when we found a spot where we could see the road and still be hidden. My heart stopped when I saw the man get out of his car and begin searching the place where we got into the bushes. He said things like, "You can come out, I'm not going to hurt you," and "You girls like playing hide and seek." I almost began to cry, and I could see Jenny was as scared as I was. After maybe 5 minutes, the guy gave up and went back into his car. We saw he turned around yet again and drive off towards the other village. So after waiting for a little while, Jenny and I got out of our hiding spot and walked back towards her house. We did not even walk that long when we heard the sound of a car behind us. And you probably have guessed it was the same car, the same man who had been chasing us before. Jenny screamed, "Run!" and we ran straight to the cornfields on the right side of the road. We ran as fast as we could while we heard the car behind us. Without even looking over our shoulder, we reached the cornfield and heard the screeching of car brakes. The guy yelled at us, but we didn't pay attention to it. We just wanted to reach Jenny's house as quick as possible. When we got there, we immediately went into the house and locked the front door. Jenny's mom came downstairs and asked what we were doing. We could only cry and stutter out some words, but eventually managed to tell the story. Jenny's mom turned white as a sheet when she realized what had happened and called the cops straight away. She then called my parents to come pick me up. Jenny and I talked to the police, and that was that. My parents took me home and I slept in their room for a couple of days. We never played that much at Jenny's house after that. The car was spotted a few times after that, but the police never really could do anything about it. Luckily, nobody ever went missing or something like that. But that road still gives me the creeps today. When I was 12 years old, I walked home after school. This happened when I got home from school early. My middle school was 13 miles away from my home, so I usually took the bus to get there. But since Hardersfield is a small village, the bus only stopped 4 times a day. 2 times in the evening and 2 times in the afternoon. Usually I would be home around 5, but that day a teacher got sick, so I could leave school early and went home around 2 o'clock. There was a big roundabout just outside the village that would take you to Hardersfield and 3 other villages. When I knew I didn't have the chance to catch the village bus, I would take my bicycle to go to the roundabout, where another bus stopped. A lot of people in my village did this, so I usually had some people to talk to while we went to the bus stop. Of course, this day I didn't know I would leave school early, so I had no bike. There was, however, a van that people, volunteers in Hardersfield, would drive in as some sort of community service, so you wouldn't have to wait for hours at the bus stop. For some reason the van didn't show up, and after 15 minutes, I decided to call my parents and ask if they could pick me up. Nobody answered, unfortunately. Since the weather was reasonably good, I decided to walk to my house. That would take me about 30 minutes. The road I had to take was, like everything in Hardersfield, surrounded by farmland with an occasional farm here and there. It took you straight into the town centre, so it was a very quiet road, no other traffic than townsfolk and tractors. After 10 minutes into my walk home, a car stopped next to me and opened his window. A guy who was in his 30s and said hi, asked if I needed to go to Mason Line, the same place me and my friend Jenny were being followed a few years earlier. I had trouble hearing what he was saying, so I thought he asked for directions. I gave them to him and walked away. He then kinda shouted, "Hey, I can give you a ride, hop in," and opened the passenger door for me. I got a bit startled by this, but didn't think it was that weird. Maybe just a guy being friendly. So I said, "No thanks, I don't need to go to Mason Line," to which he immediately replied, "So where are you going then? I can drop you off." I got rather annoyed by this and answered, "I can't tell you, sir, I don't know you," and again wanted to walk away. He gave me a big smile and said, "My name's John, now you know me, get in the car." I already had begun to walk away, so I gave him a quick no thanks and checked the time on my phone. I heard the passenger door being slammed and John driving his car next to me, keeping the same pace as me. Whenever I walked faster or slower, he did the same. He had the window of the passenger seat open and began talking to me, asking questions about how old I was, to which school I went, if I had a boyfriend, stuff like that. I began to feel very off ease and just ignored him altogether. He got very mad at this and began saying and screaming things like, "You are a little bitch," and "You think you are better than me." Then all of a sudden he turned the car towards me and I was afraid he was going to hit me. I almost fell over and lost my bag in the process. He laughed and said, "Still think you're the queen." At this I just lost it and ran away. I left my bag in the dirt and started running towards one of the farms further down the road. At first I thought this guy was chasing me because he drove behind me for a short while. But I guess he didn't think I was worth the hassle, thank goodness. Turned around and drove off. I got to one of the farms pretty quickly because I had been running like crazy. I greeted the farmer, who I didn't know very well. He clearly saw I was upset and took me inside, where he called my parents for me. My grandpa answered the phone. He usually came to our house in the afternoon, had dinner with us, then went back home. And he said he would come pick me up immediately. When he got there, he and the farmer looked around for the car for a while, but the guy was already gone. We also went looking for my bag, but it seems the guy took the liberty to grab it as a souvenir. I was never fond of Mason Lane after that incident with Jenny, but it seems it was the favorite spot for creepy guys to lurk on children and try to take them there. What else would John want to do up there? I also never, ever walked home from the bus stop after that. When I was 19 years old, that time a truck driver saved me. There was no gas station at Hardersfield, being the place it is, so you had to drive for 15 minutes to get your car some juice. I didn't really mind though, because the place occasionally had happy hours between 6 and 10 p.m. That meant fuel with 30% off. When I say place, I actually mean a parking spot for trucks. That's where the manually operated gas station was, next to this parking spot which had a hotel and restaurant on the other side of it. Truckers could park their trucks here and go get a meal and some sleep in the hotel. Or they just slept in their vehicles. You would get the occasional catcalling, but most of the time everything was quiet. So when it was time to fill up my car, I drove to the gas station and parked my car behind the person who was already using it. I got out to check my tires since I had just bumped something on the road. I looked up and saw that the guy at the pump was looking at me. He was around my age and looked friendly enough, so I said hi. He smiled at me and we began some small talk. After a while I asked if he was done fueling up his car since I didn't want to be outside all evening. He started to make up some excuse that it always took a long time with his car and blah blah blah. But I pushed him a bit and he moved his car so I could take my turn. I expected him to drive away, but he seemed to want to talk a bit more. It began to be a bit weird when he said something like, "You have a really nice car, but it isn't nearly as pretty as you." I smiled at him awkwardly, but didn't really respond to it. He gave me some more compliments, and then I said I was gonna go home, since I was done fueling up my car anyway. As soon as I wanted to open the door up, he sort of pushed himself between me and my car. I stood there baffled and asked him what the hell he was doing. He grabbed me around my hips and twirled me around so I was standing with my back against the car. I got mad and tried to push him off me, but since I am a pretty petite girl, that didn't really have much effect. He then proceeded to say stuff like, "I've always wanted a pretty girl like you." But I got really nauseous when he said, "We can go to the hotel and get a room, or you can get in my car and I'll drive it somewhere." There was some sort of forest area close by, so I knew he was talking about going there. He then tried to kiss me, but I tried my hardest to get loose. That's when a truck drove by and honked his horn at us. I began waving my hands above my head and hoping he would stop and help me. As if by miracle, the driver actually parked his truck pretty close and walked up to us. The driver asked if we were having problems, to which the guy responded, "Nah man, just having some fun with my girlfriend over here." I began to cry and said I wasn't his girlfriend. The guy and truck driver got into an argument, and then all of a sudden the truck driver turned into some kind of King Kong, grabbed the guy and threw him off of me. He punched him in the face a couple of times and called him a sick fuck. The other guy clearly wasn't a match for my sudden hero, and got knocked out pretty quick. He then told me to go sit in my car and lock my doors while he called the police. He also called the hotel close by to send some people out. After 20 minutes or so, the police showed up and took the guy with them. They asked me and the truck driver some questions and said they would look at the surveillance cameras. After the police left, the truck driver asked if I was okay, but I was so shaken up that I only said a quick thank you before I blasted off. I now wish I had taken the time to properly thank the truck driver. Who knows what could have happened if he didn't come to my rescue. So wherever you are, truck driver, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for saving me that night. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 314. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Well, I've been a good boy recording-wise tonight. I even remember to fit in time to record some audio for a collab that I've quite frankly been very bad and kept somebody waiting a bit too long for, so that's recorded. I'll get that edited and sent off to them with all the relevant information, and then it's up to them when they want to put it up. So at some point in the future, two of the videos at one point will be collabs. Or they might just be bonus videos. We'll see what I've already got recorded. We'll see. Okay, and with that, I think I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.